Let's bring in our guest today, Cory Hughes. Cory, are you with me?
Yes. Hello.
Excellent. So, hey, it's so wonderful to meet you. All I know is that one day I was perusing through some podcasts and there was something up there about JFK. And I thought, and I looked at the name and I said, I don't know who this guy is. And I thought I knew everybody. And so I said, I've got to listen to this. So I listened and I was really impressed with you. I want you to know that. You are an ex-police officer, if I remember correctly. And but anyhow, tell everybody about your story, about who you are, where you come from, and then tell us how you got involved with the whole JFK thing.
Sure. My name is Cory Hughes. I'm a full-time Kennedy researcher. It takes up most of my time. I'm an ex-cop. I was a cop for about 8.5 years. And I decided to get into, well, I became a kind of historian by hobby back in 2015. I spent 3 years on World War II and the Holocaust, and the Holocaust will inevitably lead you to the doorsteps of Kennedy. And so in July of 2018, I just made the decision. I run a podcast publishing company, so I had the time to put into this. And so I made the decision to become a full-time researcher, and I spent about 3 to 4 years in this trance of the assassination. It was all-consuming. It was all I did all day long. And years 4 to 5, which bring us to today, took me, writing the book, which just came out. It's called A Warning from History. And yes, it is my first of several books to come, because obviously you can't fit the totality of the assassination into a single book. But I cover everything, all the big questions that people wanted to know: the shooters, the tramps, the impersonations of Oswald, everything. So
Wow.
That's where we are.
That's pretty phenomenal. So, but growing up, were you like a normal kid? Did you have a normal life? Where did you grow up? How did you end up becoming a cop? I'm more interested in what got you to the JFK.
Oh, that's a very long story. And no, I feel like Axel Foley in Beverly Hills Cop when he said, growing up, I fractured an occasional law or two. And that was me until I decided one day, really out of the blue, that I just wanted to be a cop because I was kind of bored with life. And I was like, that looks exciting. And so that kind of got me back to school. I got a bunch of degrees, and I got a degree in crime scene technology, law enforcement technology, criminal justice, and public safety administration. And so I went back to school, then I became a cop, and then I decided to leave, and I went into the cannabis industry. I moved to Colorado, spent 3 years working in the cannabis industry, and then I started my own company in 2017-ish, podcast publishing. I worked with all the big Bitcoin guys. I had at one time the largest Bitcoin podcast network, and then sometime around 2016, 2017, I began an interest in history, and by 2018, I started my Kennedy research. So, because it's the most important event, definitely in American history, potentially in world history. And
Wow.
So I just needed to know.
I'm so glad you said that, because I've been saying that and harping on that I've been on this network for 12 years, and I've had 2 or 3 other shows going at the same time for at least 12 years. And every station I'm on, I'm known as the JFK lady, because Mae Brussels was my idol. And I've been following the JFK assassination since I was 13 years old. Now I'm 66. So, 50 years ago, we didn't have the internet. So I could only do it with the few books we had and things like that. I think Mark Lane's book, To Justice, or whatever, I can't remember the title of it now. But basically, I think that was one of only 3 or 4 books I could get my hands on at the library for like a decade. And then, after that, then it became books, and then it became a little bit of VHS in the 90s, and then, conspiracy conferences started, and then the JFK conferences started. So, yeah, I've been looking into this as long as I can and reading as much as I can. So, But it's really interesting to me that you got to it later in life. I mean, what was the defining thing of the JFK assassination that got you to dive into the rabbit hole and not look back?
Well, I had the time to do it. I had the time to invest, and that was the biggest factor. And so, but it's been a fascination my whole life, like everyone else, from the time of the
Good.
JFK movie.
Okay.
Right? I mean, I've studied Kennedy before, but not very in depth and just the superfluous. Like, I mean, here's the thing. Like, when I really got serious about research, I ditched everyone's books. I just went right to the documents, and I read about 100 to 120,000 pages of documents in about 4.5 years. And so,
Wow.
the only people who really the only researchers out there whose work I really think has some depth to it are people like Hank Albarelli, Michael Collins Piper, Michelle Mehta, whose book on Centre Mondiale Commerciale is like priceless.
Yes.
And so, but the vast majority of Kennedy researchers and books they put out are just rehashing the same old nonsense.
Well,
and they go around in circles and reference each other over and over again and get nowhere. So I had to disregard all of the body of research that was current because none of it seemed to go anywhere.
Yeah. No, they're all niche researchers. That I keep telling them that. I said, you guys never look at the big picture. You're always like onto one thing. Like I'm onto the who shot behind the fence, and I'm onto who shot in the triangle, and I'm looking at what the military was involved with, or LBJ, or whatever. And you're right. They never look at the 30,000-foot view like I always try to do, because that's important.
There's even I'll give you one example of something that's just really beyond disappointing for me. So in the standard FBI David Ferrie file, the 450-page file, that's the common David Ferrie file, in it you will find statements from a guy named Frank J. Chilona. Frank J. Chilona is the roommate of Thomas Compton up in Hammond, right, where David Ferrie went afterwards. So well, when you read through that statement, it's clear David Ferrie never went to the Winterland. David Ferrie hid out in Hammond the whole weekend. And when you piece together the timeline of David Ferrie, it's obvious he never went to the Winterland, the Winterland ice skating rink, or more formally known as the Winterland Ice Arena. So he was hiding out in Hammond the entire time, except for a brief stopover that he made, a brief trip he made to Galveston to check into the Driftwood Motel for Leighton Martins and Alvin Bobouf and Sergio Arcacha, who are the three men who actually went to the Winterland while David Ferrie was hiding out in Hammond. And when you put together the pieces on that trip to Hammond, Louisiana, you come to realize that, hey, why did he need to create a story of an alibi of going to the Winterland? Well, obviously, because David Ferrie was in Dallas. And so when you start with the statements of Frank J. Chilona, which have been out there for 40 years or something like that, and reverse engineer the entire series of events, it becomes clear what David Ferrie's series of activity was, and it connects directly to the grassy knoll. And so I don't understand why some of these connections haven't been made sooner. The information has been there. People have looked at it and skipped right over it and pretended like it doesn't exist. And so that was one of my key drivers when I really got into this. I realized that once I started to make some discoveries, I realized there was a lot of meat on this bone, and that it was kind of unforgivable for a lot of this stuff to not have been figured out sooner.
Well, and I'm going to play devil's advocate for 1 second here, because I agree with you on the surface of it all. But there is one thing I've got to say. I know that Penn Jones and some of the original researchers, even Mary Farrell, if you look at them all, there are instances where a lot of those documents, they find out from the person who actually gave those statements to either FBI or whoever was investigating them, that they lied in those statements. So one of the problems they were running up against, just in their defense for now, let's say that everything those guys said in every one of those statements that you've read, which are probably 99% true, even if there's 1% falsehoods, that's giving you're going down a path, if you believe that, you're going down a path and making conclusions that maybe aren't correct in that one little area. Okay.
Well, see, I want to comment exactly on what you're saying, because this has popped up again, and I can give you other examples.
Sure.
But what it comes down to is I understand exactly what you're saying, right? We'll
Yeah.
have a statement, and then later
Well,
somebody will
and the
come up
only
with something
reason I'm
and say that it
saying
wasn't
is
true.
because Penn Jones actually interviewed somebody that had been interviewed by, they have their statement out there by wherever you got your documents,
Right.
FBI, whatever. And he told Penn Jones, I totally lied because I was covering up for something I didn't want them to know about,
Sure.
right? Yeah.
Sure. But then what you end up having are conflicting statements. And then you have to look at the context of each statement, and you have to look at, hey, this person testified to this under oath during a deposition, but yet later someone else is coming around and saying that this person told them something different, right? And so then I see people fight over a sworn deposition statement over some hearsay that the person is denying the statement, right? Like that pops up numerous times. That popped up in the case of Buell Frazier and whether or not he drove Oswald to work that morning, and the statements of Ed Shields, who Ed Shields testified to under oath during an HSCA deposition that he heard someone call out to Frazier, who arrived behind the book depository, and said, "Hey, where's your rider?" And Buell Frazier called out, "I dropped him off in front of the building." Right? So that's a sworn
Mm.
statement under oath by Ed Shields, which debunks the idea that Buell Frazier ever drove anyone to work that morning, because he didn't. And so then you have people later on coming back to dispute that sworn statement with a bunch of hearsay, saying that Ed Shields' statement is hearsay, right? So then I see people
Right.
fighting over which statement is correct. And to me, it is all about judging each one under context, and particularly in the category of Ed Shields, it's obvious that Frazier, because it fits with other key aspects of the story that should be there that aren't. So Buell Frazier in particular, he was most certainly in cahoots on some level with
He
William
had to be.
Shelley and Billy
They
Lovelady.
arrested him and were going to throw him in jail. And
Right.
so
And
he fingered Oswald. I mean,
Right, right. And so, but his name was dropped at the Sportsdrome rifle range by William Seymour, who was the man who was going to the rifle range impersonating Oswald, because Oswald never had a rifle, never went to the rifle range. And we can say with certainty that it was William Seymour at the rifle range because he was accompanied by a large, husky man with a dark complexion, Lawrence Howard, who he's seen with all over the place. So a big part of my research focused on who was impersonating Oswald. And when it really comes down to it, there were two people who were primarily impersonating Oswald. You have a couple miscellaneous other incidents that could have been other people, like Larry Crawford, because it was Larry Crawford at the Texas Employment Commission with Laura Cottrell, right? But the two men who were impersonating Oswald were Kerry Thornley and William Seymour. This, to me, is brutally obvious as you go through the documents that pertain to them.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Did you rule out which one was down in Mexico City?
That was Kerry Thornley.
It was Kerry Thornley.
Yeah, because you can trace his movements back through Alice, Texas, where he's identified as Oswald after the assassination. He goes to a radio station looking for a job. He goes to a diner asking about a job. But the entire time, he's there with a woman who's pregnant and has a child with her. Okay, so this took me a little bit of time to figure out, but this was certainly Kerry Thornley coming back from Mexico City on his way to Dallas. And so, but we know it was not Oswald, because Oswald was still in New Orleans on September the 26th when he closed out his P.O. box and had added a forwarding address to the Payne's address, right? So
correct.
Right.
He was there until mid-September because Judith was with him all the way up until the day he left.
I don't know if I buy any of her stories. I can't fit her into this anywhere. She doesn't even fit into any miscellaneous references in any way, shape, or form. I think her stories are complete nonsense. She doesn't fit into what I can absolutely say happened with certain circumstances, particularly the only thing I'll give her credit for, and maybe she knew this, maybe she was guessing, but is that there was a relationship of some sort between Kerry Thornley and Marina Oswald, because that was most certainly true. So basically the incidents coming back through Alice, Texas, definitely Kerry Thornley, because of, and I can say that because of the relationship with Marina, and Marina was obviously with him on those days. On the 3rd of October, Lee Harvey Oswald is allegedly staying at the YMCA that night, right? But the next night he's staying in Fort Worth again. But Marina is not there because Marina is with Kerry Thornley as he's traveling back from Mexico City, passing through Alice, Texas. So,
okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
And then that brings us to the Sylvia Odio incident, because that was on September the 27th, right? And so September the 27th, that's clearly William Seymour, Lawrence Howard, and Lauren Hall. And how do we know that for a fact? Because
Right.
Lauren Hall told us so. Lauren Hall told the FBI on September 17th, 1964, that he went to the Sylvia Odio's because he knew her and he was soliciting help for the Cubans, and he was with William Seymour and Lawrence Howard. On the 24th of September, 1964, a couple days later, he recanted that story. But it's too late. We know that he knew
Right.
her.
And the two girls have been on camera saying that they did come to the house.
Right.
The sister and her. Yeah.
Right. And those are the three men that we have to consider as being Lee Harvey Oswald in various places. Lee Harvey Oswald himself, William Seymour, and Carrie Thornley. Because it was Carrie Thornley and William Seymour establishing that legend. Like the Sportsdrome rifle range. Most people try to put Oswald at the rifle range with his Carcano, right? But nobody can do that because it was William Seymour. And the first time he went there was on September 28th. Of 1963, which was the day after the Sylvia Odio incident, because they had just arrived in Dallas. And this is when these incidents where Lee Harvey Oswald starts to be seen start to occur around the time of the Sylvia Odio incident, which is weird because he's supposed to be in Mexico City at that time, but he's not. Right. So one of the things I've definitely picked up on is that the person that we consider to be Lee Harvey Oswald, he's kept out of the picture. Like he is in the wind. He's out doing something else. And all of the things that we know about Oswald, like staying at the boarding houses, the dates he particularly stayed at the boarding houses, everything about him, every incident we know for him to have allegedly participated in, none of those were him. Those were either Carrie Thornley or William Seymour. But the rifle range incident to me gives it away because he's not seen there just once. He's seen there number of times, right? The first time is on September 28th, which is a Saturday in 1963, but he's allegedly still he's allegedly not in the area at that time, right? So from there, he's seen in October, and then he's seen again in November on the 10th and the 17th of November. So he's at this rifle range at least 4, possibly 5 times. But the official story says he went there once, shot at Garland Slack's targets. But when you look at the individual incidents, the one thing that everyone can agree on is that it was Lee Harvey Oswald who was there. But the descriptions of him vary from having blonde hair to black hair to everything in between. But the reason that I can say with certainty that it was William Seymour is because on at least 2 occasions he's seen there with a large, husky man who's very hairy, dark complected with long hair. That is Lawrence Howard. And Lawrence Howard, we get the same description of Oswald allegedly seen with a Mexican down at the Havana bar in New Orleans. We get the same thing at the Carousel Club as seen by Harvey Wade on the 17th, right? So, or no, it was on the 10th of, that was on the 10th of November. So all of these sightings of Oswald that he's seen with a large husky Latino, usually described as having a pockmarked face. That's Lawrence Howard every time. And Lawrence Howard is not kicking it with our Oswald. He's kicking it with William Seymour. And then the third person who was often seen with them, you get the same description, white male, relatively height, weight proportionate, 5'10" to 6 foot, with black hair, flat top, and a goatee. That's Lauren Hall in every situation. And so it's those 3 guys who are basically traveling around back and forth between Miami and Los Angeles over this like 2-year period, And so, but there's all these connections revolve around New Orleans. They revolve around David Ferrie, right? And so let's connect Carrie Thornley to Lawrence Howard real quick, right? So when you read through the Carrie Thornley documents in the Garrison files, and let me just say this about the Garrison files. I was a cop for a long time. I understand the volume of paperwork that goes through a state attorney or district attorney's office. I believe about 95% of everything Garrison had written up on his Kennedy stuff is missing. I think that what we have today, that's 10,000 pages of documents or something like that, that's Garrison files. That is a fraction of what originally was, because there isn't a single file on William Seymour or Lawrence Howard, Lauren Hall, any of these guys, like Guy Gabaldon, none of these guys, right? There's not a file on anything. So, but Garrison was actively asking people like Roger Craig and a whole bunch of other people about these, like they say there was a Negro in Dealey Plaza. That was Lawrence Howard, okay? Because back then, if you were dark skinned, it was a very different take on race back in 1963, right? So
Cory, let me ask you something. Did you get a chance to go through all of the films and look for Lawrence Howard within any of the films or pictures from Dealey Plaza on that day?
So here's the weird thing. So obviously Garrison tells Roger Craig that there was either a Negro or a dark-skinned Latino who was arrested in Dealey Plaza, but they let him go because he didn't speak English. Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
Okay, so that was Lawrence Howard, but we have a problem. I even have the photograph. I have the photograph of Lawrence Howard. It is clearly Lawrence Howard.
Okay.
Here's the problem, though. The problem, though, is that Richard Randolph Carr, who witnessed this from the 6th floor of the courthouse building, right across the way that he was working on, he sees everything that goes on outside the back of the book depository. He's the best witness in Dealey Plaza, period. He is the proof that the shooters in the book depository were Lawrence Howard, Lauren Hall, and on the roof, Sergio Arcacha. Okay, so that was the shooters at the book depository, and that was the best testimony on that was from Richard Randolph Carr, not just in his statements to the Dallas police, but in his testimony on the Clay Shaw trial. Okay, so he basically says that within 30 seconds of the assassination, that the back door flies open and that 3 men come running out. 2 men, one of them being a dark-skinned Latin, get into a Rambler station wagon and pulls off and drives away. And then the 3rd man is William Seymour, because William Seymour, and I'm going to say this definitively because nobody can provide any evidence of the contrary because I've been looking for it for years. Oswald was not present at the book depository on November 22nd, 1963. At all. I have doubt to even work there. If anything, it was a front job like every other job he ever held, because the man who was present at the book depository, mistaken for Oswald or identified as Oswald, was William Seymour. His picture is captured in the Robert Hughes film. About a minute and a half into it, he's out back where he gets a signal from Detective Trantham, who's not even supposed to be on scene yet at this time, but he is. So back to Richard Randolph Carr. Richard Randolph Carr basically says that as the door swings open within 30 seconds of the assassination, 2 men, including the dark-skinned Latino, get away in the Rambler station wagon. They pull around the block. What happens from there is that William Seymour goes into Dealey Plaza. He looks to Detective Trantham, who's not supposed to be there for another 5 minutes yet, and Detective Trantham gives him some kind of signal. I kind of figured that signal was letting him know that Lawrence Howard and Sergio Arcacha got away in the Green Rambler, made it around the block, down Commerce, back to Houston Street. And so from there, William Seymour, because he's working in the building as Oswald, he feels comfortable there because he belongs there. He's supposed to be there. He walks into the front door of the depository at exactly 12:33 p.m. Lauren Hall is still inside the building. He notifies Lauren Hall that Lawrence Howard and Arcacha got away in the Rambler. So then he tells Lauren Hall to leave, and Lauren Hall leaves out the back door of the depository. This is seen by multiple people, including Richard Randolph Carr and Velma, who is the caller to Coast AM November 22nd, 2006, who called in and talked about seeing the person come out of the back of the depository with a high-powered rifle. Okay, well, we know that's Lauren Hall because he ditches that rifle, which is then identified by the FBI within 24 hours of the assassination. It's identified as a Johnson 30-06, and it's traced back to Richard Hathcock in Los Angeles.
But, okay, now where did they find that rifle? Because I'm still I've heard 3 different stories on where that rifle was found.
So I give you 2 answers. One answer is the lawn crew, which I read from an unverified source. And the other answer is it doesn't really matter where they found it because they found it and within 24 hours had the entire backstory to the rifle, including a statement on paper from Richard Hathcock at his allied detective agency out in Los Angeles, right? And then he tells him the story all about Hall and the rifle and how 5 days before the assassination, Hall tells him he's going to catch a flight to Dallas, which is he didn't catch a flight. He actually drove a white Plymouth station wagon to Dallas, which eventually gets broken down. And there's a statement of somebody who saw Lee Harvey Oswald pushing a white Plymouth station wagon into a junk dealer, right? That was obviously Lauren Hall and William Seymour, right? So you can see how you get like William Seymour misidentified as Oswald all over the place, like including like well, we'll get back to other examples of that later on.
Yeah. So back to Thelma and everybody seeing everybody come out of the book depository. Right. That's where we were.
Right. So from there, Lauren Hall then crosses Commerce Street, where he's seen again by Richard Randolph Carr, who says that he then makes it down to Record Street, where he gets into the light green Nash Rambler station wagon. Okay, so
Right.
this is where I'm at. So you have 12:33. This happens. So we're up to about 12:35, 12:36. Well, around this time, William Seymour had re-entered the building, talked to Lauren Hall, who flees out the back door. So this, I'm going to pause and we're going to go shoot over to something else because we have to talk about Baker and Truly and the incident in the lunchroom 90 seconds after the second, because that story is garbage. Okay, it never happened. It's a rewriting of history. So allegedly 90 seconds after the assassination, Oswald cuts across the building, ditches the Mark Carcano, comes down the stairs, but he's not seen by Vicki Adams. That whole Vicki Adams story about not seeing Oswald is 100% pure distraction, because that is not the most important part of that story. But we'll get to what is. So after the assassination, Vicki Adams goes to the elevator. She can't go down the elevator because the power's off, right? So she has to take the stairs. When she gets to the bottom of the stairs, what does she see? She sees William Shelley and Billy Lovelady standing by the power box. And that's super important because that's not in any of their statements that they ever re-entered the book depository. But it obviously is super important because they're the ones who killed the power to the building.
That's right.
Why would they do that? So William Shelley killed the power of the building, and he had to do that because the elevator had to stay planted on the 6th floor. And it was good thinking, because if he hadn't, when Vicki Adams pressed the button, the elevator would have come down and they would have been screwed and stuck on the 6th floor. Right. So he had to kill the power. He had to have the elevator stuck up on the 6th floor. And so you have Sergio Arcacha Smith on the roof, and we know that he left on the roof a Mauser 7.65. This was confirmed in Gary Shaw's book, Cover Up. You know, and the Dallas police said that it was left there by.
I was just with Gary yesterday.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I got the info that he confirmed for me that the Dallas police actually responded to that and said that it was left there by a security guard. So we have confirmation that it was actually there. And so it was Sergio Arcacha on the roof. He comes down in from the 6th floor, from the roof to the 6th floor. He gets in the elevator with Lawrence Howard, possibly Lauren Hall, but Lauren Hall stays in the building for 3 minutes. I don't know why the hell he did that. But he comes down, they come down in the elevator, they flee in the green Nash Rambler. But William Seymour comes back into the building, 12:33. He takes the elevator back up to the 6th floor. This is where things get interesting. So, Baker and Truly, right, allegedly have this 90-second after the assassination encounter with Oswald in the 2nd floor lunchroom, but that's a combination of stories. It's a melding of stories.
Let's just stop right there and examine where those statements came from, because the first person that talked about those statements, wasn't it the reporters in the area at the time? Didn't they pick up on that and talk about it a few days later? I'm trying to remember how that story got concocted and who talked about it first. Did you ever figure it out?
Well, I remember Baker. I think I figured out the why they concocted it. But Baker was on a TV show and he's talking about it.
That's right. Thank you. I kept thinking there was something to do with TV show. Go ahead.
But it's ridiculous because in Baker's own handwritten notes, in his first handwritten statement on top of his notes, and in a memo from Curry, if I'm not mistaken, they all say that they were going up the stairs, and it was either the 3rd or 4th floor in the stairwell where they stopped this man. And it was then that Roy Truly identified this man, who happens to be wearing a light brown jacket, the same light brown jacket that William Seymour is captured in the Robert Hughes film. So then you have the man coming down the stairs, and he's stopped by Baker and Truly. And this is so vital because it's not Oswald. It's William Seymour, and Roy Truly covers for him. He says that man works here, and they both let him go. And we know Roy Truly's in on this. I mean, he's married to Fred Court's cousin. He provides all the bad addresses that he shouldn't have to the Dallas police. I mean, he's in on this as everybody else. And so but from there, this is another thing. This didn't happen 90 seconds after the assassination. This had to have happened no sooner than 12:38 p.m. And I say that because of the statements of Robert McNeil. Robert McNeil, who in the modern era is a total hack and claims to have seen Oswald coming out of the building. I debunked everybody's statements about seeing Oswald coming out of the building, which included Pierre Salmon and Terrence Ford and Robert McNeil, right? Those are the 3 guys who allegedly put Oswald on the front steps at 12:33. Complete fiction, and that wasn't even come up with until the 90s. So, but in their original statements, none of those guys claimed to have seen Oswald, but Robert McNeil, he goes into the book depository confirmed at 12:33 p.m. He doesn't make it to a phone until 12:36 p.m. Because at 12:36 p.m. that's when his office has the phone records dated, right? And so he then comes out of there and he says clearly in his statement to Dallas Police Department that no police entered before me or until I left. Okay. And so clearly Baker could not have entered 90 seconds after the assassination, because if he had, he would have run into Lauren Hall on the first floor. He would have seen William Shelley and Lovelady and Frazier. He never saw any of those guys. He allegedly just has Truly, and then they try to take the elevator, and then they go up the stairs, and then they find Oswald on the second floor, right? So there's no possibility Baker could have been in there within 90 seconds or within 3 minutes, because if he would have been in there within 3 minutes, he would have contact with numerous people there that he never mentions in any of his statements. And so he doesn't make it into the building till 12:37. And why? Because he made an arrest in Dealey Plaza. So if you watch the couch film, you'll see that he gets off the bike and he doesn't run to the book depository. And when you read his statements about why he went to the book depository, he's so full of it. He says that he heard shots and he determined that they came from the book depository, so he ran there. That's complete myth, because he was so far back in the motorcade, he never would have heard any shots at all. He wouldn't have had a clue what was going on. What happened was he gets to Dealey Plaza in front of the book depository, and he saw the shooter at the Daltex building, Emilio Santana, hop down from the ledge beneath the fire escape, which is where the shot was fired from, or multiple shots, actually. He hops down from there and he runs north on Houston Street, and Baker saw this. Baker gets off of his motorcycle and he runs north on Houston Street and he captures Emilio Santana. He's brought back and arrested in front of the book depository, which is captured in Willis photo number 10.
That's right. Yeah,
that is correct.
Yep.
And
I remember seeing that. Yep.
It is not until at least 12:37 or 12:38 that he enters the building, because all the people who are on the ground floor, like including Bill Shelley and William Lovelady and all those guys, right? They would have been out of there by then, because that would coincide.
They're out front, because you got pictures of them out front walking around with everybody else.
Right. So that would coincide with Baker's statements that he didn't see them in there, and he just goes in there with Truly, and that's when he goes upstairs as William Seymour, who had re-entered the building at 12:33 p.m., went up to the 6th floor. So here we have about a 3-minute period. William Seymour is on the 6th floor of the depository by himself. What is he doing? Could he have been the one who planted or put in place the rifle? Is he the one who could have put together the original sniper's nest? Could he have? What was he doing in those 3 minutes on the 6th floor of the depository? I don't know, but it was something along these lines, right? So then he begins his descent down the stairs at 12:38 p.m. He bumps into, or maybe 12:37, but he bumps into, at this point on the 3rd or 4th floor, Baker and Truly. Truly identifies him as an employee. He's wearing the light brown jacket that he's caught captured in the Robert Hughes film. Then he continues down the stairs, where at precisely 12:40 p.m., William Seymour exits from the book depository, where he runs down the slope. The whistle is let out by the Negro driver of the light green Rambler station wagon, which is Lawrence Howard's, which is parked right out in front. He gets into the station wagon, and then he and the 4 guys total leave in the green Nash Rambler, as observed by Roger Craig and numerous other people, Marvin Robinson. And then they make their way to Oak Cliff, where William Seymour will then drop off everybody at some kind of safe house, because by around 12:50 p.m.-ish, he's then seen at the Tidy Lady Laundry, still wearing the light brown jacket, pulling up in the light green Nash Rambler station wagon. He's observed by, I forget the family's name, the Penningtons, inside the Tidy Lady Laundry, right? So they say he comes in there, he makes a phone call in Mexican, he's all agitated, he hangs up the phone, and he heads south on North Clinton Street, okay? That's William Seymour, and he's leaving the light green Nash Rambler station wagon, which will eventually be picked up by Lauren Hall, because within a matter of moments, within an hour or so, we have another sighting of William Seymour and Lawrence Howard as they flee Dallas, as per Robert Vincent's flight from Dallas. So Robert Vincent, I'm sure you're familiar with this story. He's on the CIA plane that left out of Dallas.
Right,
remember?
right. Yeah, I was trying to place where that was, but yeah.
So he's in the flight. They turn around. They head to Dallas. He says they pull up in a dirt patch next to the aqueduct. 2 men get on. He describes one of them as looks like Lee Harvey Oswald. He describes the other one as being this large, husky, dark-skinned Mexican, possibly a guy from South America. It's like, by this time, give me a break. We got dozens of sightings of these 2 guys together. It's clearly William Seymour and Lawrence Howard. And
exactly. We got to take a break, Cory. This is great. We'll pick it up right from here when we come back in a few minutes. So everybody hang in there. You're going to get the rest of the story tonight. Here we go. the school book depository, the jacket, the laundry. We were at the laundry.
Right. So, there's always been some debate over the station wagon that was seen in Dealey Plaza and whether it was Oswald who ran down the knoll. Let's talk about that for a second, because
Sure.
Roger Craig, he's like Swiss cheese. The guy's hit or miss. Sometimes he comes up with some information that is absolutely phenomenal and definitely true, like his observations of seeing Oswald run down the grass and get into the green Nash Rambler and having it leave with the Negro or dark-skinned Latino driver, right? So that was phenomenal testimony. It is incredible,
Right.
and it was absolutely true because it was William Seymour. This is the one thing I want to also point out, is that his being certain that it was Oswald just goes to show how close William Seymour and Oswald actually looked to each other. The only difference was that William Seymour was about 5'6". He was actually about 2 or 3 inches shorter than Oswald. So, but other than that, facially and build-wise and demeanor-wise, plus Roger Craig also identified this person as having worn the light brown shirt or a light brown garment, but it was actually the light brown jacket that William Seymour was captured in the Robert Hughes film. So, but many people believe that it was definitely Oswald who fled from the building, and that it was Ruth Payne, and it was Ruth Payne's light blue Chevy station wagon. There's no evidence for that whatsoever, period. There's nothing to support that.
Right. And I gotta say, Cory, I tried to track down that little incident with her picking him up, but she was at home. Right. She wasn't anywhere near Dealey Plaza that day.
Correct. And she ends up having a phone call with Michael Payne.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, we know all about that stuff. So, yeah, it was the idea that it was her and that it was Oswald, because here's the thing. Oswald is a construct for the most part. Most of what we know about him is false. Most of what we know about him is a constructed story that was played out by Kerry Thornley and William Seymour, with the few exceptions that we've mentioned. So,
right.
But yeah, Oswald at this point, from what I can tell, Oswald is still in Fort Worth. He's staying at the Paynes because that's where he's living. He's not living at the boarding house. The boarding house is most certainly Kerry Thornley. And so when you look at the first boarding house that was run by Mary Bledsoe, who just also happens to be the witness on the bus, who's never on the bus because her statements are completely easily debunked. She claims to have seen Oswald on the bus with holes ripped in his elbows and his shirt pocket ripped and buttons ripped off his shirt. But that didn't happen until after the incident at the Texas Theater, and she was on the bus with him before. So that was definitely, she saw him on television and testified to that. Plus, yeah, I went into great detail in her statements in the book, and she's not credible to say the least. And then you have the bus driver, who was Cecil. Was it Cecil McWaters? Yeah, I think it was.
So. Yeah,
it was William Whaley's cab, right? So yeah, it was Cecil McWaters, and so he testifies that it was Oswald, but then he's like, oh no, it wasn't Oswald. Turned out to be Roy Milton Jones, who he had testified to as having been on the bus. So nobody can put Oswald on the bus. McWaters can't put Bledsoe on the bus. Right,
I've
never
never
on the bus.
Been able to. I don't know how anybody even thinks that's a reality. But anyhow,
right, exactly. And he wasn't in the cab. Somebody else took a cab, but it was not Oswald.
He was not in the cab. We know that. Okay.
Right, and so might as well go into Tippett a little bit. So you have the person who, personally, I believe the person who got into the cab, who was wearing a gray, more or less flannel wool type jacket, which is the same description of the jacket worn by Oswald, allegedly by Buell Frazier and Linnie Mae Randall that morning. They both told the FBI that Oswald, when he came over, was wearing a gray, more or less flannel wool type jacket. Well, there's only one person who I've actually found in Dealey Plaza who was wearing that jacket, a gray, more or less flannel wool type jacket, and that would be Alvin Beaubouf, because Alvin Beaubouf and Leighton Martins are captured obviously in Dealey Plaza in the moments after the assassination, wearing a jacket just like that. And so what I believe is that Alvin Beaubouf is the person who took the cab, never in the bus, got straight into the cab from Dealey Plaza, ends up at the boarding house. Well, not the boarding house. Let me see if I can explain this. So the cab drops the person off. William Whaley drops the person off with at least 10 or 11 minutes till it's 1 o'clock, right? And so obviously this person
I
didn't walk to the
Now,
boarding house.
wait. I did. Yeah, I was just saying he didn't drop him off at any boarding house. If I remember
Right,
correctly, the
right,
guy said, "I want to get out and walk to
right.
my destination." Right.
Right, he drops him off at the 500 block, and he lived at the 1,000 block, right? But
Right.
that's only 5 blocks, and he was dropped off somewhere, by my calculations, 11 to 13 minutes to 1 o'clock. So,
Okay.
but he doesn't show up. Allegedly, Oswald doesn't show up at the boarding house till 1:02 p.m. Okay, but so there's a problem there because now we have 13, 14 minutes that someone is just disappeared and then they should be showing up somewhere. So what I've kind of concluded is there had to have been another safe house in the area that the person who was dropped off by the cab went to. At
Okay.
that,
Wait. Hold on. I know people who know where all the safe houses were,
right.
and they're still alive. Basically, one of them is a very good friend of mine, and the other person that knows where all the safe houses were is Rod McKenzie. Have you interviewed him yet?
No, I have a list somewhere of about 9 addresses that turned up in, I believe, Clay Shaw's notebooks or something along those
Right.
lines. And
Right.
so, but
Well, there were. Yeah.
the only
Anyhow.
explanation I can come up with for the gap, the missing time from the time the cab dropped the person off till the time someone shows up at the boarding house is that there had to have been another safe house in the area for them to go to for that 10 to 12 minute period, right?
Okay.
However, it is not that person who shows up at the 1026 North Beckley. It's Kerry Thornley. And that tells me that Kerry Thornley, who is definitely not at the book depository, definitely not in Dealey Plaza. He's doing other things because he's seen that morning at the Top 10 record store. He's seen where he gets like a ticket to the Dick Clark show. He's
Right.
seen not only Dub Stark, but he's seen at the Jiffy store, right, where he buys peanut brittle and beer,
Right.
right? So this is
Right.
Kerry Thornley. He's killing time all day, and he's at this other this is all my logical deductions that I've made. So he has to be at another safe house in the area waiting for the signal because all of this is on a schedule, right? Because you'll end up with what I forget the vehicle number. It was Westbrook and Croy show up at the boarding house, honk the horn, right? It was Kerry Thornley. So Kerry Thornley had to have been at this other safe house. And then when I believe it was Alvin Boboof shows up at the safe house, that is the signal for him to walk over to 1026 North Beckley. And if you'll remember, when William Whaley was interviewed by the news, he gave the address of 1018 North Beckley, which just so happens to be the address next door. So I don't know if he had some insider information or knew something, or that was the address he was said to have been going to, but that's the address that he gave to the news when he gave his interview. So that could have been the other safe house, but who knows? Possibly irrelevant. But at precisely 1:02 p.m., Kerry Thornley walks into the boarding house at 1026 North Beckley. He's wearing the white T-shirt. He goes and he grabs the light tan or whitish, kind of the super light colored jacket that ends up getting discovered at the Texaco. He grabs that and he grabs a gun, and then he leaves from there and he walks over to the area of Zhang Boulevard where he gets into the cop car with Westbrook and Croy, who then drive him over to the Tippit shooting because there's no possibility that anybody could have made that walk. The whole idea that anybody made that walk, I think, is dependent upon the concept that Tippit was shot at 1:16 p.m., but Tippit was not shot at 1:16 p.m. Tippit was shot at 1:06 p.m. So, and this is, you can easily put that together by the statements of the people who were already on scene at the time.
Right. So we have what's her? God, the kind of crazy nutty lady that was waiting for the bus. I can't remember her name.
Oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about. I don't even include her in. I just ignore her completely in my book. She's not even a relevant factor. There's only 3 witnesses who matter.
You go straight to the black lady.
Akila Clemens,
Yes.
Frank Wright, and Doris Holen. Those are
Correct.
the 3 witnesses who you need to put together what happened at
right.
the
And
at
Frank
the
Wright
shooting.
was in the truck. Is that correct?
No. Frank Wright was up in his house, like across the street and down the block.
Oh, right,
And,
right. Okay.
Right. Basically,
Okay.
him and Akila Clemens and Doris Holen all put 2 men on scene. Those men are David Ferry and Kerry Thornley. So, and you can understand that when you trace David Ferry from the Grassy Knoll, where he's one of 2 shooters. The shooter on the Grassy Knoll, everyone wants to know, is Jack Valente. So, but we'll get to the knoll perhaps another time. But David Ferry goes from the knoll back behind the book depository, where he's seen by Velma in the light gray Plymouth, which is owned by the Collins radio guy, Mathers, Carl Mathers,
Right.
right? So then
Right. Carl
he ends up
Mathers.
taking,
Yes.
right. So he's seen at behind the grassy knoll by Velma, and then he ends over at the Tippett shooting where the same exact light gray Plymouth is seen by Frank Wright. That's what Frank Wright's contribution to this is. He puts the gray Plymouth there, the gray Plymouth being driven by the man with the real heavy eyebrows wearing the black hat with the wide band and the dark blue suit as seen by Ed Hoffman behind the knoll, right? So that's David Ferry. The railroad man was Andrew Jerome Blackman. But David Ferry, I traced from behind the grassy knoll to behind the book depository to the Tippett shooting, where he then flees to an address on Belmont up in Fort Worth, where then I connect him to a light gray or a light colored Ford Falcon station wagon, which he'll then flee from Dallas in to go to Hammond, which then he's then put in that light colored Ford Falcon station wagon by Thomas Compton himself, which kind of completes the loop there for me. But anyway, back to the Tippett shooting. So Tippett is shot by Carey Thornley. Carey Thornley, who is obviously mistaken for Oswald by all of these people. But you've heard the statements by Akela Clemens. The best one is by Doris Holland, because Doris Holland, those statements were brought to light by Dale Myers, who is like an Oswald did it guy. Such a joke, right? So he tries to debunk his own information that he gathered in his articles on it, but he does a really good job. But here's the thing, and he wouldn't know this because he was never a real investigator. He was never a cop. One of the statements surrounding Doris Holland, one of the statements surrounding Dean's Dairy Way, right? So Mrs. Dean, right, who sees the person trying to get into the back of the junk shop, right? Well, her children tell Dale Myers that an anecdote, right, about the jacket. Like they joked in their family that you could have paid our way through college with that jacket, right? Like it was an inside joke because Mrs. Dean actually found the jacket on a tire rack next to the Texaco, not underneath the car, and she held on to it and personally delivered it to the cops. So the person who's credited with finding the jacket, Westbrook, who's obviously in on this whole thing since he drove Carey Thornley to the damn Tippett shooting, right? Obviously that's another jacket or a separate planted jacket, or there's shenanigans with the jacket, but that's a whole nother story.
And the wallet too.
And the wallet too, which disappears, right? But we know from the wallet you have like the selective service card, which is signed in Marina's handwriting, right? So that connects her back to the setup, which to me connected her back to the setup with Carey Thornley in Dallas through Alice, Texas, and all that stuff, right? So that was proof of her complicity and involvement, because when they send a Russian spy back here and the FBI gets their hooks into her, she's going to do whatever the hell they tell her to do.
That is correct. Yes.
Like this is also obvious to me. Like this is just brutally obvious, and it just breaks my freaking heart that I had to spend 5-6 years of my life doing this, and I couldn't have just read somebody else's book who figured this out already. Really, it just pains me that some of this stuff was so brutally obvious and nobody else has gotten to it. I'm hoping that changes at some point, but I'm not really leaving much meat on this bone. There's really not the stuff that I'm looking into now. Like people have no idea connects to Kennedy whatsoever.
Okay, well that'll be interesting. Maybe we could talk about that at the JFK Junior Summit. I don't know. We'll see. Anyhow, so now we've got Oswald. Let's talk about the Tippett shooting.
Sure.
What exactly happened in your eyes?
Okay, so in my eyes, you have J.D. Tippett, who is in Dealey Plaza. He's captured in the Robert Hughes film again on Houston Street. So, but according to Velma, remember, she sees him meet with the person behind the book depository in the gray Plymouth, says, I told you to move that car. And so, because that was Carl Mather's car, that was Tippett's friend's car, right? And so he told him to move that car because he knew that was Carl Mather's car, right? So they then go around the building, meet on the other side, then they head over to Oak Cliff, where J.D. Tippett goes and sits at the Gloco station waiting for someone to get off the bus, right? That same bus that nobody got on in Dealey Plaza at 12:36 p.m., right? That bus, well, nobody gets off that bus, and I don't think anyone was ever supposed to get off that bus. I believe that J.D. Tippett was supposed to go there and intercept that person, and when that person didn't get off the bus, the people who sent him there knew nobody was getting off the bus, but he didn't, and he panicked, and he goes to the Top 10 record store, makes the phone call, probably to Westbrook. That would be the most logical deduction. Nobody answers because Westbrook is out driving around in Oak Cliff. And so then when he can't get a hold of his contact, he then heads to the prearranged meeting spot at 10th and Patton, which had to have been prearranged because of the presence of David Ferry. David Ferry's who's seen behind the grassy knoll, then behind the book depository by Velma, who then makes his way to the Tippett shooting in the gray Plymouth, is seen with the gray Plymouth described exactly as David Ferry is described behind the grassy knoll, with the black hat and the blue suit or blue jacket as described by all the witnesses who saw this man. And so he's put there by Frank Wright, particularly Doris Holland. All the best witness I love is Doris Holland. Hers stuff is great. And so Kerry Thornley gets out of the vehicle, driven there by Westbrook with Croy in the passenger seat. You can tell it's them because their statements are all jacked up, and Westbrook lies about having his unmarked police car with him that day, and Croy's statements are all contradictory, and his timeline is all messed up. And so but he ends up talking to Tippett through the little triangular window. And here's the thing. So Tippett, if he does not know this person, he would have seen them that morning at the Top 10 Records store. He would have seen him in the days leading up to this at not only Austin's barbecue, but at the diner, right? So he's supposed to meet a person to get off the bus. Then he gets to the prearranged meeting spot because his person never got off the bus. He gets to the prearranged meeting spot, and we know it's prearranged because of the presence of David Ferry and everybody's meeting there, right? And then he sees a person who, if he doesn't know, has seen 3 times in the past couple days. And I would be spooked as hell if I was Tippett at this point. If I seen this person who I didn't know, who keeps appearing around me, and here I'm supposed to meet with my people, and this person is here, I would sure as hell pull my gun too. So I believe that's what happened. He saw this person. He was freaked out because he shouldn't have been seeing this person, or he knew this person and knew something was wrong. And so he then pulls his gun, at which point in time, Kerry Thornley fires 3 shots from a semi-automatic handgun. And we know it's a semi-automatic handgun because of the impressions on the rear side of the casings, right? From the firing pin. 3 you can link to a semi-automatic, one from a revolver, which is the second shooter, which is David Ferry, who came up from the alley and delivered 1 shot to Tippett's head, right? Then he stays and he reloads his weapon and drops the shell casings. So from there he flees in his light gray Plymouth, and he heads to an address on Belmont, the same address that David Wayne House is arrested from, and Kenneth Glenn Wilson, right? So at that same house, when the cops go up there, they call out that they find on scene a light-colored Ford Falcon. Well, the light-colored Ford Falcon is seen again numerous times, and then ends up in Hammond, Louisiana. So basically, after the Tippett shooting, I traced David Ferry to this address on Belmont, and then from there, he doesn't fly out. All the scuttlebutt of him being a pilot of any kind in the assassination is ridiculous. He flew in his Cessna or whatever, I forget what kind of airplane, Stinson, whatever kind of airplane he had. And then that evening of the assassination, it was flown out by Joe Cody to Shreveport, where he ends up getting in that little accident out there, right? So,
I forgot about that.
So Ferry flies in his airplane. Joe Cody flies it back the night of the assassination when he gets in that little accident, right? And then we have Kenneth Cody, who's living at the boarding house, who is his uncle. Remember, which is like the weird. You see all these weird connections, and the Codys are definitely in on this, right? So, I'm losing my train of thought. Where were we?
Oh, we're back at the Tippett shooting, and we're getting the information from all the witnesses, trying to figure out actually who did it. And you've said it was David Ferry and Kerry Thornley.
Right, okay. And so Garrison knew it was Kerry Thornley. Who was the Tippett shooter? Because when you go to Kerry Thornley's file in the Garrison files, the very first page is a note card that discusses J.D. Tippett. It says Office J.D. Tippett, and it has a little note under it. Okay, and then the next page, you have Garrison discussing Jones Printing and the information surrounding Jones Printing, which we should know from Harold Weisberg that it was Kerry Thornley who picked up the flyers from Jones Printing, right? So we have the first 2 notes in the file for Kerry Thornley.
So now what you're doing is you're tying it back into the Fair Play for Cuba printing.
100%, yes. Because Kerry Thornley was the Oswald lookalike who was setting him up in New Orleans, who used the name of Leon Osborne to pick up the flyers, which was then identified by Douglas Jones at Jones Printing, right? So yeah, so this all connects back, and this will all connect back to David Ferry's trip allegedly to the Winterland, where he ended up going to the Ala Motel and makes phone
Right.
calls to WDSU and WSHO, which were admitted contacts of Kerry Thornley in his affidavit to Jim Garrison. So I'm just linking all this other stuff to Kerry
Sure,
Thornley in the
sure. No,
process.
that's
So,
fine. I just wanted the audience to understand when you said Jones Printing, you and I both knew what that was about, but they may
right.
not. Yeah.
Okay, so and then from there at the Tippett shooting, then you have him fleeing, trying to get into that secondhand junk shop on Jefferson. He can't get in, where he's seen by Mrs. Dean, who then
Right.
provides that testimony, right? And her kids give that information to Dale Myers. Then he goes to the Abundant Life Temple, which when you dig into the Abundant Life Temple, one of the incorporators of the Abundant Life Temple was a driver for Continental Trailways also.
Oh.
Kenneth Cody was a Continental Trailways bus driver. So how much you want to bet Continental Trailways has a CIA smuggling connection?
Of course. Yeah.
Of course, right?
All the coffee companies did, all the Trailways buses did. I
Right.
mean, every pilot in the Army Air Corps did. I mean,
As
whatever.
did Disney on Ice, Ice Capades, all of the traveling ice
Yeah,
companies, which
that's
I was able to
right.
connect right back to the Winterland.
And
So
of course, so did all of the circuses.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So these were all CIA operations to smuggle, because these guys ran the drug industry. They did all the gun trafficking and the gun
Yep.
smuggling, and
Exactly.
they're all around dirtbags, right? And so, but then you have Kerry Thornley eventually makes his way by the theater, where he passes by Hardy's shoe store, where inside the shoe store you got who? You got Johnny Brewer, you got Tommy Rowe, and you got Igor Vaganov, right? Those are the three guys inside the store. And so then they're in on this thing, obviously. Tommy Rowe is the guy probably directing everything, because he's good friends with Jack Ruby, moves into Jack's apartment when he goes to jail, right? So then you have Kerry Thornley passing by this at, what time is it now? It is now 1:36 p.m. He walks in the theater, doesn't buy a ticket, goes up to the balcony. But the problem is, Oswald's been in the theater since between 1 o'clock and 1:07, as per Butch Burroughs. Butch Burroughs, when you start to dig into the statements he made to researchers, I think James Douglas was one of them, a couple of them after the assassination, he basically says, hey, I couldn't tell the FBI anything, because this was all weird and I didn't want to say nothing, right? So, but he basically, Oswald bought his ticket. He takes Oswald's ticket as Oswald goes in. Oswald goes into the theater, and this is between 1 o'clock and 1:07, right? So the Tippett shooting happened at 1:06. So yeah, definitely not Oswald. Oswald's already in there. So might as well get into the Texas Theater real quick. How much time do we have left anyway?
We got till 57 minutes.
We're good.
So
we're good.
We got time.
All right. So basically, you have Oswald comes into the theater between 1 and 1:07. He goes in, buys the ticket, hands in the ticket, all this stuff. He goes in and he sits in front of Jack Davis, right? So there's 22 people in the theater. It's a 900-seat theater. Jack Davis is like, why is this guy coming in and sitting right next to me? Because he does. He gets up and he sits right next to him, and then he doesn't talk to him. And he goes and does the same thing to 2 or 3 more people. Sits right next to him.
A pregnant
right?
lady and then another guy, if I remember correctly.
Well, the pregnant lady was last. He ends up sitting next to the pregnant lady last. He and the pregnant lady then speak. They then get up and walk back to the lobby. Now, the pregnant lady then leaves. Oswald buys popcorn at exactly 1:15 p.m. as per Butch Burroughs, and then he goes back into the theater and he sits there for another 30 minutes. Eating his popcorn, watching the movie, okay? So, but it's at 1:36 that Kerry Thornley comes along and trips up the series of events where they say Oswald entered, didn't buy the ticket. Well, that was Kerry Thornley. He goes in, goes up to the balcony. This is where things get confusing, because I've gone over this with a fine-tooth comb. And so you have a phone call.
You still can't figure it out, right?
Yes, and I'll tell you why, because nobody will fess up to being the first cops on scene. So what you have is Johnny Brewer coming over and talking to Julia Postal, the girl who's in the front case, right? So there's all kinds of contradictory information. Oh, I saw him, I didn't see him. It's a bunch of nonsense. They're a bunch of liars. So I don't know what their level of involvement is at this point, other than I know Johnny Brewer's being instructed. He's getting direction from somewhere. But Julia Postal seems kind of stupid. But she at one point says, I don't know nothing, and I was told to do these things, like call the police. But at other times she says, I told everyone to do these things, and I decided to call the police, right? So everyone's screwed up. But she ends up calling the police. However, what you end up getting is around 1:40 p.m., which is only 4 minutes after the time that Kerry Thornley would have entered the theater. You have cops on scene at the Texas Theater calling back to dispatch, letting them know that there's a problem there. But allegedly around this time, you also have Julia Postal's phone call. So the response to the Texas Theater had nothing to do with the phone call Julia Postal made. Period.
Oh, really?
There's just no connection at all.
This is news to me. I didn't know that.
There's no possible way that when you look at the timeline and what happened, so you have Johnny Brewer comes over approximately what is it, 12:37 p.m. or mix it's 12, or was it 1:37? 1:37, right. Comes over 1:37 p.m. And so he then goes in the theater with Butch Burroughs. They all walk around and they look around the theater for a couple minutes, and then they come back, and then she makes the phone call to the Dallas police, right? However, the first cop is on scene at 1:40.
Okay.
So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so there is,
yeah.
and so then when you look at and there's, all I can see is the number of the officer. There's no name associated with it, and I can't seem to figure it out by looking at the roster of who was who that day. And so, but the first cops are on scene at 1:40, and therefore there's no connection to Julia Postal's phone call. Right. And so
okay, I think I know where you're going with all this, but I want to ask you a question. Have you looked into who was FBI at the time in Dallas to see if that matches any of that facial recognition on this guy? Because I heard a rumor here in Dallas many years ago that one of the guys that actually went into the theater was an FBI agent that was working with the Dallas police to get, because they had already framed Oswald way ahead of time, right? And Oswald was working with them.
So
if this is all true, I don't know.
Right,
but,
right.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I'm
the
just
person,
saying.
the person who entered the theater unquestionably was Kerry Thornley, because it follows the series of events starting at the boarding house, leading all the way through the Tippit shooting, all the way through.
Right, but he goes up to the balcony, correct?
And he goes up to the balcony, right? He goes up to the balcony, and so the cops come in at like 1:45 or 1:50 or something. They arrest Oswald out the back, and then we have the testimony of Butch Burroughs, that's another Oswald lookalike who could have been his brother, right? That's exactly what he said. He said he looked like he could have been his brother. He's arrested out the back, and that is also confirmed by Bernard Hare, who owned Bernie's Hobby House, who was right next door to the Texas Theater, and they see Kerry Thornley, who was arrested by Stringfellow, who writes in his report that he was arrested in the balcony, that Oswald was arrested in the balcony. It's Stringfellow, and I forget who the other officers were. But within 5 minutes, you have this person seen wearing the white T-shirt in a red Ford Falcon owned by Igor Vaganov over at Mac Pate's garage, which is like less than a half a mile away, less than 5 minutes later. So he's put in the car, driven somewhere, given the keys to Igor Vaganov's red Ford Falcon, and then he's seen at Mac Pate's garage, like within 5 minutes. Exactly.
Okay. So they did arrest him out of the back of the theater, but where did they took him from the balcony, and then how did they get him to the back of the theater? Was this one of the, I can't remember the Dallas, I've been in the Dallas theater a couple times. I think it has the tunnel from the exit all the way down the side of the building out the back. Am I right?
I'm not sure about that, but I know that when you walk in the front doors, you can see like the entrance up to the balcony is completely separate. Like you go up the stairs, and then there's an entrance door.
It's completely separate. And then you could go into the theater on the right or left side and go straight down those tunnels with the curtains out the back. Because the exits are not just right in the theater like modern theaters. I don't know if people remember this, but in the old theaters, to walk down the sides of the aisle type of thing, you had to go through, you didn't have to, but there was a tunnel basically down the side of the theater so you didn't bother anybody, and you would come out in different places, like 3 or 4 places through curtains. So they were called side tunnels or whatever, and it would take you straight out the back exit door. So my theory is they took him out of the balcony, down the stairs in the lobby, went down one of the side tunnels and out the back door, and nobody saw him.
Right, except that was as per I'm sorry, I'm having a moment. As per the usher, that was 3 or 4 minutes after. It was 3 or 4 minutes after Oswald was taken out the front, so everybody could have cleared out of the theater at that point.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, right. See, I thought it was right before they got him.
No, it was
I
after.
Never did clear that. Okay, all right.
So everyone was out of there, and so this is when you have George Applin. They have the statements of George Applin, who's in the theater, who claims to see Jack Ruby inside the Texas Theater at that time.
Now, I've never even heard this.
So yes, and so this, I believe there's some valid substantiation for in the Dallas police files, because so let's revisit The hour before the assassination, we have Jack Ruby driving the
Yes.
green truck, right? Okay, so I actually know what happened to that green truck after the assassination, believe it or not. And so
What? Tell
um,
me. Tell me.
we'll get there.
Tell
We'll get
us.
there. That green truck. So Jack Ruby's driving the green truck, drops a person off at the grassy knoll, who's allegedly seen with the rifle casing, all that stuff, with the hat with the tassel on it, And so,
Yeah.
but there is. When you study the Texas theater, you'll come to see that Stringfellow had searched a pickup truck that was left running in the alley behind the Texas theater. Now, the color of the truck is never stated. However, when you look at the statements of George Applin, who says that after he saw Ruby shoot Oswald on TV and Ruby's picture was everywhere, he recognized him as the man that he had talked to inside the Texas theater. When the fight was going on with Oswald, he tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Hey, man, that guy, there's a gun waving around down there. You might want to get out of here." And so that information has been out there. And to me, that's substantiated by the search of the pickup truck that was left running in the alley. Now, of course, they never mentioned the color, but
let's pause for 1 second. You know that Ruby's brother looked a lot like him, right?
Oh, I talk about this in my book, Samuel Ruby.
Yes. Okay.
So Jack Ruby never went to the police station where he was photographed. He was never at the Dallas Morning News, and he most certainly was never in the hallway of the police department. All those are pictures of Samuel Ruby, his nearly identical brother.
Okay, the only reason I brought it up is because I wanted to be sure that it was Jack and not Sam in the theater.
Correct.
Do you know?
I believe it's Jack, not Sam.
Okay. All right. That's great. Okay, so we put Jack there, and do you think he was there just to report back to the mob about what had happened? Or
I think Oswald was supposed to die there.
I think so too.
Right. And when he didn't die, who did he call? And this is the most important phone call. This is, one of the most important. There's a couple other ones that are really important too, but this is the most important phone call because this is a direct line to who was behind the assassination. Who does he call after Oswald goes to jail? Do you know?
He called a guy named Hunt in either North Carolina or someplace like that.
No. I'm talking about Jack Ruby. Who did Jack Ruby call?
I don't know.
Jack Ruby called a guy named Al Gruber. And so
Oh, you're kidding. Okay, go ahead. Tell me this.
Al Gruber is the right-hand man of Mickey Cohen.
That's right.
And so Mickey Cohen at the time is in jail, but you have to understand the history of Mickey Cohen, and this is where we get to the Israelis.
Okay.
So the Israelis
Mossad is part of this.
They were behind it. They were behind the assassination. The CIA takes their orders from Tel Aviv. So anytime you're talking about anything intelligence, you're talking to Mossad. Period.
Yep.
So the bottom line is,
I don't know if I totally agree, but I do agree to a point. But let's go back to 1963, and I think at that point in time, they were probably well in bed with them.
Well, they have almost 20 years of being in bed with them because you can go back to the first couple interactions in 1946. David Ben-Gurion sends Reuven Daphne to L.A. Reuven Daphne forms a relationship with Bugsy Siegel. Bugsy Siegel meets with them, provides them over $50,000 in the first couple months, and that's the birth of the relationship.
Bugsy, I don't know if remember Bugsy was Jewish, but there were Meyer Lansky was. I mean,
they're all Jewish.
Yeah,
they're all Jewish. The mob was run by Jews.
Italian.
Everyone thinks the mob was run by. Well, see, here's the thing: when people think Italians, what they are really thinking is Sicilians, the Sicilian mob, right? So, but that's not the case. The mob was run by Jews always. Post 1931, after the assassination of Sal Maranzano and Joe Masseria by Meyer Lansky, the Jews took over the mob and they ran it all the way through the 70s. Okay, so when people talk about the Jewish mafia, they're talking about the mob. Okay, and this brings us to.
I will say this though: I do know that there were Italian mobsters in Chicago, New York, New Jersey, Atlantic City. I know that there is still Italian families that do run some of the business.
Right? Oh yeah, of course they do. It's just the overlords are all Jewish.
Correct.
And so, but basically, this brings us back to, and so by 1949, you have this relationship that's burgeoning in L.A. But then you have David Ben-Gurion and Rudolf Sonborn setting up in Hotel
Yes.
14, running the Sonborn Institute, right? Which really,
Yes.
in my opinion, stepped on Meyer Lansky's toes a bit. But since they were all Jews, he didn't really care, and he wanted in on
Yeah.
the action. So Meyer Lansky then opens up the ports to these guys, which opened up 20 years of smuggling our arms from all the bunkers that were broken into, like Homa and all that stuff. Like
Yes.
none of that was going to the anti-Castro Cubans. Let me give you a hint: nobody cared about the anti-Castro Cubans. All of that stuff got deflected to Israel to fight the Palestinians. Okay, so the heart of the story of Kennedy and the anti-Castro Cubans is a front cover for the fact that they were sending all that stuff to Israel, and the fact that we wouldn't provide them direct support in their war because that meant fighting the British up until 48, right? And so we wouldn't fight our own ally through a proxy. There was no point. We would never help them do that. And so they stole all the arms from us for over 20 years. Okay, but then you have NUMEC. Then you have NUMEC starting in 56 with Zalman Shapiro and the stealing of all the nuclear material out of Apollo, Pennsylvania.
I've been wondering about that whole story. I got pieces of that from my ex-CIA buddies, but I've never been able to follow up on it. So it sounds like you did.
Yes, of course. This is all the same story. This is all the same players.
Okay.
Now they're no longer the pre-Israeli Zionists. Now they're the Israelis, and they're the Mossad, who are still in bed with the Jewish mafia in America, who've been participating with the Sonborn Institute, getting the arms and smuggled to Israel. Now, starting in 56, they start smuggling uranium to the Israelis for use in the Dimona nuclear reactor in the Negev Desert.
Yes.
And Kennedy knew all of this stuff. Kennedy knew that the Israelis were undermining us as a civilization, stealing from us, taking our arms, now smuggling nuclear material. He knew it, and he was going to shut them down, not only in as far as their nuclear program, but as a whole. He was going to cut all funding. This was a fundamental threat to the Israelis, and that is why they killed him. And if you want to understand the relationship between the Israelis and the CIA, you got to go back to post-World War II and Donovan and Dulles and Reinhard Gehlen and the relationship between them and the post-war Nazis, the Gehlen organization, and the years between the OSS and the CIA are crucial. Those year and a half to 2 years down in South America and Argentina, when they came up with the plans for the global security state, the 17 intelligence agencies, the CIA, and all that stuff designed by Reinhard Gehlen, right? So
you got it.
This is all like, and like when people tell me that they killed Kennedy because of Vietnam, I'm like, screw yourself. I can't believe people still say that stuff. It's like Kennedy spent $6 billion on helicopters and airplanes. He wasn't pulling out of nothing. Okay, money talks, and I don't want to hear about his troop reallocations. Okay, it's ridiculous. They weren't going nowhere. They weren't going anywhere. So he was killed by Israel over the fact that he was going to shut them down as a nation, and it was facilitated through their relationships with the mafia, which had been going on since 46, and the CIA, which had been there since the inception.
Right.
So that's the relationships.
Absolutely. Now, we're still on a path on a story here, so let's kind of finish that in this show, and then maybe when we get to the 25th, we can pick it up as to why JFK was killed. I don't know, but we'll talk about that.
Sure.
But anyhow, so we're at the theater. We've got everybody's getting arrested. One out the back, one out the front. Where are we in the story at that point?
Well, that brings us to the Winterland and David Ferry's alleged alibi.
Sure.
Because that's all it was an alibi. David Ferry never went to the Winterland. He was hiding out in Hammond, Louisiana the whole weekend. That, we can tell by the statements of Frank J. Chilona, and which could directly contradict the statements of Thomas Compton, who Ferry knew from the Civil Air Patrol, which he basically hypnotized all those kids and was molesting them and all that stuff. And somehow they kept him in his loop for life. But anyway, so that brings us to the Winterland, right? So the Winterland Ice Arena, it was originally operated, managed by a woman and her husband named Mary Boots Roberts and her husband Ronnie Roberts. And so they were like professional ice skaters. They worked with Ice Capades and all this stuff. I'll give you a hint, though. Mary Boots Roberts worked for the CIA. Okay.
Yeah.
And so,
okay.
As
did almost everybody in our story.
Yeah, everyone in the story. It's ridiculous. So when you come to understand, like, everybody works for the CIA, and it's a CIA crafted official story.
And they all don't know they're all working for the CIA. See, that's even the best part of the story. I laugh every time I think about it.
Right,
half of them didn't even know the other half were also CIA people. So anyhow.
And so you get the story of David Ferry goes to the Winterland and meets with Chuck Rowland. Well, that's not his real name. His real name is Rulon Chuck Rowland, Rulon. He's a French Canadian. He's half Korean. professional ice skater, gold medalist, all that good stuff. He's allegedly married to a woman named Joyce Rowland. They have some children. Richard Rowland and Rulona Rowland are the children. And so at the time of the assassination, David Ferrie allegedly goes there. The two kids, who allegedly are Melvin Coffey, which is just an alias for Leighton Martins, and Alvin Bobouf, they go ice skating. David Ferrie allegedly sits by the phone, and a bunch of phone calls are made. This and that. He waits by the phone, never talks to Chuck Rowland about opening an ice skating rink and all this stuff. And they're there a couple hours, and then they leave. So while David Ferrie's allegedly there, Rowland testified to this before the Warren Commission deposition that David Ferrie came up to him and introduced himself as David Ferrie and said, "I am here," no less than 5 times. No less than 5 times. So why would you do that?
Okay, now, wait. Every time he went up to him, he said, "I'm here"?
Yes. As per the testimony of Chuck Rowland. So,
that's wild.
But either way, he's introducing himself as David Ferrie 5 times. So
Right.
Why would you do that? Also, before David Ferrie gets there, before Chuck Rowland had arrived, and everybody who worked there knew it was David Ferrie because this guy kept saying his name like it was a point to say his name. "Hey, I'm David Ferrie. I'm here. Tell him I'm here," right? "I'm David Ferrie." Let him know David Ferrie is here, right? So everybody knew David Ferrie was there. So what does that tell you? David Ferrie sure as hell was not there. Okay. When you look at the description that were given, this guy was large, over 200 pounds, 6 foot tall, wore a red toupee. Okay. That's not David Ferrie. David Ferrie didn't wear a red toupee. All right. So it's Sergio Arcacha-Smith, and he's there with Leighton Martins and Alvin Bobouf, and they are there establishing this alibi. Because from there, they then go to Galveston, right? And they have this whole story about going to Galveston and then heading up where they stop in Port Arthur at the Gulf Service Station, where they're seeing they change the spark plugs in the Mercury Comet station wagon. This is the best part because the Mercury Comet station wagon that these guys are driving, the light blue Mercury Comet owned by David Ferrie, is identical to the light blue Ford Falcon station wagon that is being driven by David Ferrie at this time. Okay. Identical car, different branding, all made by Ford. Right. This is tradecraft in action, because when David Ferrie gets down to the Driftwood Motel that Saturday night, the license plate on it goes back to the Ford. Right. So there's some license plate switching going on too as well.
Sure.
Right.
Which was very common back then.
Very common.
Yeah.
Right. Just like Carl Mather's license plate ending up on the red Ford Falcon that was owned by Igor Vaganov. Right. The same thing. Right? Just all the license plate swapping. Because back then, if I'm not mistaken, your picture wasn't even on your driver's license. Right. So
that's right. And you could swap plates and they'd only run the plate, and half the time they didn't know who in the car.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's pretty wild. So anyhow.
And so these guys,
it was easy to make up false driver's license back then too, by the way, folks. Real easy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the entire point of the story about, because who are David Ferrie's alibi witnesses that morning? So at noon, he's allegedly seen at G. Ray Gill's office by Alice Guidros, right? He's allegedly had been at court with Carlos Marcello, but when you look into what witnesses put him there, you can't put a name to the witnesses. Then you have G. Ray Gill, Carlos Marcello as his alibi witnesses. Are you going to trust those guys whatsoever? I don't think so.
No.
And
so
I
thought it was just those guys. I thought it was the mob guys that were his witnesses. I didn't know about this. Who's this other person?
Alice Guidros is G. Ray Gill's secretary. She put him at the office at 12 noon and said that he left there at noon, told her he was going to be back, he was going to get something to eat, and never came back. So she lied because he was in Dallas as of for 2 days before the assassination, as per Jack Martin. Remember, Jack Martin kicked off this whole thing with the phone call to the FBI saying that David Ferrie was there, and then he testified to Garrison, or wrote up in a statement to Garrison, that David Ferrie was in Fort Worth on the 20th when he flew into Fort Worth. Right. So, but here's the thing. The idea, we might not know about any of this if it wasn't for Jack Martin's phone call to the FBI. Why did he do that? What did he do? What was his deal? And then when you start to look into Hank Albarelli's work on Jean-Pierre Lafitte, and you come to see that Jack Martin was not always Edward Suggs. So that's another interesting route that definitely needs to be explored further.
Interesting.
That's
Very
because,
interesting.
and that was just another alias. Remember, because he used the name Edward Suggs, but they called him Jack Martin. But there was
That's right.
But then
Yeah.
you had Jean-Pierre Lafitte, who was Jean-Pierre Lafitte is a former
Oh,
Corsican
yeah, you know
mafia
what?
guy
You
who
know what?
falls
Let's just
into.
stop there. Let's let them think about all
Okay.
this because our show's over now. And I
Oh,
can't
okay.
believe how fast that went. That was
Yeah.
wild. Okay. So, you guys, if you want more of Cory Hughes, go to Cory Hughes, and that's Hughes and CORY, just one R, CoryHughes.org. Go there. You'll find tons of podcasts, tons of information. Please buy his book. It's very important we all have it in our arsenal. And he will be with us on Saturday for our first annual JFK Jr. Murder Conference. I'm calling it the Summit. That's the best way to describe it. And he'll be talking about the JFK assassination. So thank you all for being with us. Cory, thank you so much. You were wonderful. Thank you.